Imagine being so feared that an entire empire would spend the next 600 years making their children swear an oath against your name. Imagine winning battle after battle, crushing the most powerful military force on Earth, yet still losing everything in the end. Picture leading 40,000 men and 37 war elephants across mountains so deadly that half your army would freeze to death. All because you made a blood oath as a 9-year-old child. Now imagine if just one decision had gone differently. If one moment of hesitation hadn't occurred. Rome, the empire that would dominate the Western world for 1,000 years, would have been destroyed before it ever truly began. And the entire course of human history would have changed forever. You see, there was a moment. A single, crucial moment when the greatest military genius of the ancient world stood at the gates of Rome itself. His army had just annihilated 80,000 Roman soldiers in a single afternoon. The most devastating military defeat in Roman history. The city was defenseless. The Roman Senate was in complete panic, with senators literally weeping in the streets. Women were tearing their hair out in the forums. Parents were preparing to kill their own children rather than let them be captured. Rome's allies were abandoning them. The treasury was empty. They had no army left, and standing just days away was a man who had sworn a sacred oath to destroy them completely. This is Hannibal Barca. He's one of the most brilliant military commanders in human history. A man who never lost a single major battle for 15 years whilst fighting on enemy soil. At just 29 years old, he commanded an army that made grown Roman generals literally shake with fear. And boy, did he enjoy making Romans suffer. His tactical genius was so advanced that military academies still study his battles 2,200 years later. Napoleon called him the greatest strategist who ever lived. But here's what's truly insane. Hannibal came within inches of completely erasing Rome from existence. The empire that would shape Western civilization, that would spread Christianity across Europe, that would create the foundation for modern law, language, and government. It all nearly ended because of one man's hatred. But how does a 9-year-old boy from North Africa end up bringing the world's most powerful republic to its knees? How does someone win every battle yet lose the war? And what really happened in those crucial hours when Hannibal chose not to march on Rome? A decision that historians still debate to this day. The truth behind this story is even crazier than you might think. Because Hannibal didn't just want to defeat Rome. He wanted to psychologically break them. To humiliate them so completely that they would never recover. Little did anyone know that his entire life had been building to this one moment of decision. Welcome to the insane true story of Hannibal Barca. Hannibal's story begins not with his birth, but with his father's humiliation. You see, Hannibal was born in 247 BC in Carthage, modern-day Tunisia, right in the middle of the First Punic War between Carthage and Rome. His father, Hannibal Barca, was Carthage's greatest general, fighting a losing war in Sicily against the Romans. When Hannibal was just 6 years old, Carthage lost the war and was forced to pay massive reparations to Rome. The humiliation burned deep into Hamilcar's soul. He would later reflect on this defeat and say it wasn't Roman superiority that beat Carthage. It was Carthaginian politicians who refused to send reinforcements. It was an early lesson for young Hannibal that enemies exist both outside and within your own nation. The truth is, Hannibal grew up in a household consumed by hatred for Rome. His father would tell him stories every night about Carthaginian glory and Roman treachery. But the defining moment of Hannibal's life came when he was just 9 years old. Hamilcar was preparing to leave for Spain to build a new Carthaginian empire there, and young Hannibal begged to go with him. His father agreed, but on one condition. He led the boy to a religious altar, where a sacrifice was burning. Hamilcar made his son place his hand over the flames and swear a sacred oath. That he would never be a friend to Rome. That he would spend his entire life as their enemy. Hannibal would carry this childhood oath like a burning coal in his chest for the rest of his life. In Spain, Hannibal received an education unlike any other aristocratic child. While other noble boys were learning poetry and philosophy, Hannibal was studying battlefield tactics with hardened veterans. His Greek tutor, Sosilas, taught him multiple languages. He would eventually speak at least 6 fluently. But more importantly, Hamilcar taught him how to read men's souls, how to inspire loyalty in soldiers from a dozen different cultures, how to turn enemies into allies with words instead of swords. You see, Hamilcar realized something crucial. Carthage would never defeat Rome in a traditional war. They needed someone who could think differently, someone who could do the impossible. Hannibal must have thought his education would continue for years, but when he was 18, his father died in battle. His brother-in-law Hasdrubal took command, and Hannibal watched carefully how he governed. Hasdrubal was a diplomat, preferring treaties to battles. It was another crucial lesson. Sometimes the indirect path is more powerful than the direct one. But Hannibal also saw weakness in too much diplomacy. He noticed how Roman ambassadors would arrive with increasingly aggressive demands, how they spoke to Carthaginian envoys with barely concealed contempt. The Romans, he realized, only respected one thing: strength. When Hasdrubal was assassinated in 221 BC, the army proclaimed 26-year-old Hannibal as their new commander. It wasn't even a question. The soldiers loved him. He slept on the ground with them, ate the same food, fought in the front lines. But beneath this common soldier exterior was a mind of terrifying complexity. Hannibal had spent 17 years in Spain studying every Roman battle, every Roman general, every Roman weakness. He knew their formations better than they did. He understood their psychology, their pride, their fatal assumptions about barbarian enemies. And now, finally, he had the power to put his father's dream into action. The moment Hannibal took command, everything changed. Where Hasdrubal had been cautious, Hannibal was aggressive. But Hannibal saw an opportunity here that others missed. Rome was distracted by problems in Illyria and potential conflict with Macedon. Using these new connections he'd built with Spanish tribes, he rapidly expanded Carthaginian territory. Within 2 years, he controlled most of Spain south of the Ebro River. But it wasn't conquest that made Hannibal dangerous. It was his ability to turn conquered enemies into devoted allies. You see, Hannibal realized something Rome never understood. The Romans conquered through fear and dominance. They destroyed local cultures, imposed Roman law, demanded crushing tribute. But Hannibal did the opposite. When he conquered a Spanish tribe, he would learn their customs, respect their gods, marry their nobles into Carthaginian families. He would reduce their tribute, not increase it, promise them revenge against their own enemies. In many ways, it was such an incredibly simple move, but it was the meticulous planning that made it possible. Soon, Spanish warriors who had fought against Carthage for decades were now willing to die for Hannibal personally. But Hannibal's real genius was in preparation. While Rome thought he was just another Carthaginian governor getting rich in Spain, Hannibal was building something unprecedented. A multi-ethnic army trained specifically to defeat Roman tactics. He studied how Romans always fought the same way: heavy infantry in the center, cavalry on the wings, grinding forward until the enemy broke. So he trained his Numidian cavalry to be faster and more maneuverable than anything Rome had. His Spanish infantry learned to bend but not break. His Gallic warriors practiced fake retreats. Every unit was designed to exploit a specific Roman weakness. The trigger for war came in 219 BC with the siege of Saguntum, a Spanish city allied with Rome. Hannibal knew attacking it would mean war, but that was exactly what he wanted. The 8-month siege was brutal, with Hannibal himself being wounded by a javelin to the thigh. But when Saguntum finally fell, Rome sent ambassadors to Carthage demanding Hannibal be handed over for punishment. The Carthaginian Senate refused. Rome declared war, and Hannibal smiled. Everything was going according to plan. What Rome didn't realize was that Hannibal had already been planning his next move for years. Every merchant, every trader, every diplomat returning from Italy had been quietly questioned by Hannibal's agents. He knew the exact distance between every Italian city, the loyalty level of every Roman ally, the personality of every Roman general. But here's the crucial part. Hannibal knew something that would have terrified the Romans if they'd realized it. The Gallic tribes of northern Italy, recently conquered by Rome, were ready to revolt. All they needed was someone to light the spark. In spring of 218 BC, Hannibal made a move so audacious that when Roman spies reported it, the Senate literally laughed. He was marching an army of 40,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants from Spain to Italy, over the Alps. The Romans thought it was impossible. The Alps were death to armies. No one had ever done it before. But what the Romans didn't realize was that Hannibal had sent scouts through every Alpine pass for the past 2 years. He knew exactly which route to take, which tribes to bribe, which season would have the least snow. This wasn't madness. It was the most meticulously planned military operation in ancient history. The crossing itself was hell beyond imagination. Mountain tribes attacked constantly, rolling boulders down on the stretched-out column. Soldiers fell into ravines, their screams echoing until they faded to nothing. The elephants, those mighty war machines from Africa, died one by one in the frozen passes. Men's fingers turned black from frostbite and fell off. They ate their pack animals, then their leather straps, then nothing. Hannibal himself went partially blind in one eye from an infection. By the time they descended into Italy, he had lost half his army. But the 20,000 men who survived that crossing would follow Hannibal into the gates of hell itself. Now here's where Hannibal's true genius revealed itself. The Romans expected him to be weakened, demoralized, desperate for supplies. Instead, at the Trebia River in December 218 BC, Hannibal orchestrated a masterpiece. He hid troops in the freezing river marshes overnight. Then at dawn, he sent Numidian cavalry to attack the Roman camp and retreat. The Romans, eating breakfast, dropped everything to pursue. They crossed the freezing river without proper preparation. And then Hannibal sprung his trap. The hidden troops attacked from behind. The Roman formation collapsed. 30,000 Romans died in the snow. It was Rome's worst defeat in a generation, but the Trebia was just the beginning. At Lake Trasimene in 217 BC, Hannibal pulled off perhaps the greatest ambush in military history. He hid his entire army in the hills above a narrow path between the lake and mountains. When the Roman army marched through in the morning mist, Hannibal's men descended like demons. The Romans couldn't form ranks, couldn't retreat, couldn't even see their attackers. 15,000 Romans were slaughtered or drowned trying to escape into the lake. The consul Flaminius died with his men. When news reached Rome, shops closed, women wailed in the streets, and the Senate ordered human sacrifices, something they hadn't done in living memory. But Cannae was the masterpiece that military academies still struggle to understand. On August 2nd, 216 BC, Rome sent its largest army ever assembled, 80,000 men, to finally crush Hannibal's 40,000. The Romans were so confident that senators came to watch, bringing chains for the Carthaginian prisoners they'd sell as slaves. What happened next was so brilliant, so impossibly perfect, that many historians refuse to believe it actually happened until archaeological evidence proved it. Hannibal arranged his troops in a convex formation, bulging toward the Romans. As the Romans pushed forward, Hannibal's center slowly gave ground, but his wings held firm. The Roman mass pushed deeper, thinking they were winning, but they were walking into a trap shaped like a mouth. At the perfect moment, Hannibal's center stopped retreating. His wings wheeled inward. His cavalry, having defeated Rome's horsemen, attacked from behind. The entire Roman army was surrounded. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. 70,000 Romans died in a single afternoon. So many bodies clogged the Aufidus River that it ran red for days. Roman soldiers were found dead with their heads buried in the dirt, having suffocated themselves rather than face Carthaginian swords. One consul died fighting, the other fled in shame. Of the senators who came to watch, most died with their sons. Hannibal's men cut gold rings from so many dead Roman nobles that they sent bushels of them back to Carthage as proof of victory. Hannibal now had Italy at his mercy, and this is very different to what normal conquerors would face. Rome's allies began defecting. Capua, Italy's second largest city, opened its gates to him. The Greek cities of southern Italy welcomed him as a liberator. Macedonia allied with him. Even some Latin cities, Rome's most loyal allies, began wavering. In Rome itself, panic reached levels never seen before or after. They buried alive 2 Greeks and 2 Gauls as human sacrifices. They freed criminals to fight. They armed slaves. Women cut their hair to make rope for siege engines. Parents prepared poison for their children. Because everyone knew Hannibal was coming. But here's where everything changed. Hannibal stood with his lieutenants overlooking the Roman capital, just 3 days' march away. His cavalry commander Hannibal begged him, "Give me the cavalry, and in 5 days you'll be dining in the capital." Rome had no army left to defend it. The walls were old and weak. One decisive strike, and the war would be over. But Hannibal hesitated. He said the men needed rest, that they lacked siege equipment, that Rome's allies needed time to fully defect. Hannibal's response became one of history's most famous quotes. "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal, but not how to use one." The problem was, Hannibal had a fundamentally different vision than simple conquest. You see, Hannibal realized that even if he took Rome, he couldn't hold it. Carthage, paralyzed by political infighting and jealousy of the Barca family, had sent him almost no reinforcements. His brother Hasdrubal was supposed to bring another army from Spain, but Roman forces kept delaying him. Hannibal had maybe 30,000 men to control all of Italy. It was impossible. So instead, he wanted to break Rome's alliance system, reduce it to just another Italian city-state, then negotiate a favorable peace. But the success at Cannae didn't stop there. It created new problems Hannibal hadn't anticipated. Little did Hannibal know that by not marching on Rome immediately, he had given them the one thing they needed: time to remember who they were. A new general emerged, Fabius Maximus, who understood that the only way to beat Hannibal was to not fight him at all. The Romans began a strategy of exhaustion, avoiding battle, burning crops before Hannibal could take them, attacking his allies when he was elsewhere. They called Fabius Cunctator, the delayer, as an insult. But his strategy was working. Hannibal would march to protect one ally, and Rome would attack another. He'd win every skirmish, but couldn't force a decisive battle. However, back in Carthage, people were starting to ask questions. The oligarchs who had always hated the Barca family saw an opportunity. "Why?" they asked. "Should we send reinforcements to Hannibal when he's already winning? If he's so brilliant, let him finish the war himself." Some even secretly hoped Hannibal would die in Italy, removing a threat to their own power. They sent his reinforcements to Spain and Sicily instead. Hannibal's younger brother Hasdrubal finally managed to cross the Alps with a relief army in 207 BC, but the Romans intercepted and destroyed him at the Metaurus River. They threw Hasdrubal's severed head into Hannibal's camp. It was the first time anyone saw Hannibal cry. Then, in 203 BC, the unthinkable happened. A young Roman general named Scipio, who had studied Hannibal's tactics obsessively, invaded Africa itself. Carthage, in panic, recalled Hannibal after 15 years in Italy. For Hannibal, as the implications started to come out, it must have felt like watching his life's work crumble. He had never lost a major battle in Italy, held half the peninsula for over a decade, killed over 300,000 Roman soldiers. And yet he had to abandon everything to save a city that had never properly supported him. The final confrontation came at Zama in 202 BC. For the first time, Hannibal faced an enemy who thought like him. Scipio had learned from every Hannibal victory, adopting his flexibility, his use of cavalry, his tactical innovations. Worse, Hannibal's best troops were still in Italy. He faced Scipio with raw recruits and mercenaries. His famous Numidian cavalry, the key to so many victories, had defected to Rome. When the battle began, Scipio used Hannibal's own tactics against him. Flexible manipula formations, cavalry envelopment, coordinated attacks. Hannibal fought brilliantly, but for the first time in his life, it wasn't enough. Carthage lost 20,000 men. The Second Punic War was over. As for Hannibal, he tried to rebuild Carthage as a civilian leader, reforming its government and finances so successfully that Rome grew alarmed again. They demanded his surrender in 195 BC. But Hannibal fled into exile, spending the next 12 years as a wandering military advisor to Rome's enemies. He designed naval tactics for Syria, planned cities in Armenia, taught guerrilla warfare in Bithynia, but Rome hunted him relentlessly. Finally, in 183 BC, surrounded in a Bithynian villa with Roman soldiers at every exit, the 64-year-old Hannibal took poison he'd carried in his ring for years. His last words were, "Let us relieve the Romans from the anxiety they have so long experienced, since they think it tries their patience too much to wait for an old man's death." The immediate aftermath was brutal for Carthage. Rome imposed crushing penalties, massive indemnities, destruction of their fleet, prohibition on making war without Roman permission. 50 years later, Rome would return to destroy Carthage completely, selling every survivor into slavery and salting the earth so nothing would grow. The Carthaginian civilization, which had dominated the western Mediterranean for 500 years, was erased from existence. But the broader impact was even more significant. By surviving Hannibal's onslaught, Rome emerged with an almost mythical sense of destiny. They believed they were fated to rule the world. The trauma of nearly losing everything transformed them from a regional power into an unstoppable imperial force. Ultimately, though, the people who suffered most were the Italian communities caught between these titans. Entire cities were destroyed, populations enslaved. Agricultural systems that had taken centuries to develop were annihilated. The Second Punic War killed possibly 750,000 people. In an era when Italy's entire population was only about 4 million. What is clear is this conflict was an example of how individual genius, no matter how brilliant, cannot overcome systemic advantages. Hannibal won every battle through superior tactics, but Rome won the war through superior resources, political unity, and sheer determination to never surrender. Reports suggest that towards the end, Hannibal had gone from an idealistic young general seeking to fulfill his father's dream to a bitter, paranoid exile who trusted no one. The boy who had sworn an oath of eternal hatred had become a man consumed by it. He spent his final years writing military manuals in Greek and Phoenician, desperately trying to preserve his tactical innovations. Perhaps he knew that his strategies would outlive both him and the empire that destroyed him. Modern military colleges from West Point to Sandhurst still study Cannae as the perfect battle. Napoleon carried a biography of Hannibal on his campaigns. Norman Schwarzkopf credited Hannibal's double envelopment for inspiring his left hook strategy in the Gulf War. What's really interesting, though, is the what-if that haunts historians. If Hannibal had marched on Rome after Cannae, Western civilization might have developed completely differently. Without Rome, there would be no unified European legal system, no Romance languages, possibly no Christianity spreading across Europe. The Carthaginians were a Semitic people, with a completely different culture, religion, and worldview. They practiced child sacrifice, which Romans found abhorrent. Their government was oligarchic, not republican. They were traders, not administrators. A Carthaginian-dominated Europe would have been unrecognizable to us. The truth is, Hannibal's story resonates because it's about more than war. It's about how hatred, no matter how justified, ultimately consumes the one who holds it. Hannibal achieved everything tactically possible and still lost because he was fighting not just Rome, but the idea of Rome, that relentless, systematic, never-surrender mentality that would eventually conquer the known world. His genius made him Rome's greatest enemy, but it also made him the teacher who showed them how to become an empire. In trying to destroy Rome, he forced them to become indestructible. Now, whilst the story of Hannibal is pretty incredible, I still wouldn't call him the most ruthless ancient commander who challenged an empire. For that, you're going to want to check out the absolutely insane story of Attila the Hun. A man so terrifying that Romans called him the Scourge of God and believed he was literally sent from hell to punish humanity. Unlike Hannibal, who fought for a cause, Attila fought for pure destruction, building mountains from human skulls and leaving entire regions uninhabitable for generations. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!